Okay.
So here we are with Steve Hackett. Steve, it's a brand new year and you have a brand new album out.
I do.
At the Edge of Light. It's out on the 25th of January on InsideOut, through InsideOut.
Yes.
We'd love to hear how the album came together. I know it was over quite a long period of time you recorded it, through lots of journeys, international travel. So give us a sense of that and how it evolved from the Night Siren.
Well, you know, I can't teach anyone how to write a song. All you got to do is set aside some time, and you've got to commit at a certain point. All starts with a doodle, but this one seemed to take on some extraordinary life of its own, and I still, when I'm at home, I try and listen to, if not the whole thing every day, you know, at least to a couple of tracks and crank it up, and it helps me to. It reminds me of why I did it and everything else, and I find every time I end up falling in love with it, but falling in love with music all over again, and what that does to you. You know, it's music in a way. It's a bit like today. I thought I picked up the guitar and I played for about 5 minutes or so. I thought half an hour had gone, and what happens? You go into that dream time, and or maybe it's each time you do it, you're visiting the realm of eternal renewal. That's what music does. It's so powerful. Its effect on you. It doesn't have to be my music. It might be something that I love of someone else's. But to return to this album, I'm still in the honeymoon phase with it. I'm still very much thinking, wow, did we do that? Is that little me doing that? Wow, listen to that. Listen to that drum sound. Listen to those strings. Listen to those arrangements. You know, something special happened, and I'm tremendously excited by it. I remember feeling like this when we did Selling England by the Pound. I remember feeling like this when I did Spectral Mornings. The first one, Genesis album. Second one, first one with a band or touring band of my own. And this one, decades later. Suddenly it seems like it's got so much life coming out of it, and I've sat back and let other people perform on it. A lot of women on it, a lot of female influence and great performances and writing. And, yeah, the girl power is at least as muscular as what the guys have brought to it. So it's eradicated my prejudice in that way. I think, yeah.
It's a real album of light and shade. I mean, the light is obviously in the title, but there is this undercurrent, I think you said yourself, of shadow and emerging from shadows. And are you emerging from shadow into a new period of darkness, or is there new light?
Well, I think that if ever there's something about prog that at its best it can go from a whisper to a roar, and I think that the loud stuff sounds all the more loud when it comes practically out of silence. So it's a little bit like light out of dark. For artists they call it Chiaroscuro, that Italian school of painting that I think came out of the Renaissance, and in a way there are parallels with this. All I can say is I'm still marvelling at it, really, that it came off, because it was very ambitious. We did have a ton of people on it from different parts of the world, and they bring something unique. Each of them, each of the drummers. You know, whether it's Simon Phillips in the States or it's Gully Bream in Iceland, or Gary O'Toole here. And then taking his drums and putting them through a Marshall cabinet, and so yeah, you go through a lot of irreverent things like that. You shouldn't do that with a drum kit, but nothing is sacred until it's all printed. So you got to go through that process of being prepared to be profane with the source material.
And if you compare it to the Night Siren, I found this a more kind of not engaging, but it had a lot more weight to it, a lot more sombre character to it.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about some of the tracks in a second.
Yes.
But when you were recording, arranging the 10 tracks, was there a point you knew, okay, I've got the 10 tracks, I know what the order is to make this album?
Well, it's always up to the last minute, this thing about, sometimes it's titles of things and it's the order of songs, and the perfect album should really, I think, the title should all read a little bit like poetry and should be a bit of a poem. Order of songs, I thought maybe Beasts in Our Time would be an opening track.
That's a great track, that.
If there's a favourite track, it's probably that. But, you know, it's a very close second and third with other tracks, and I realise that all of it's my favourite, really. So I just don't know. You've got to try things in different orders. We struggled with those golden wings, that the orchestral thing on the front sounded completely wrong. I tried having it at the end of Beasts, and it just sounded like completely wrong, because it was such a sharp contrast, it seemed. But it diminished the power of the incoming, so it seemed as if any idea of paradise and promised land that might have been reached at the end of Underground Railroad was served admirably by the beginning of that track, as if here's a look at paradise.
Yeah, because those golden wings, it has that sort of, I mean, it was almost like a 50s or 60s film soundtrack. You know, it's a lovely kind of pastoral thing, but then it goes into like a 12-string guitar thing, and then into a really fabulous outro solo with Nick, I think, playing the drums on it.
Yes. Well, it's interesting you said, 50s or 60s. 50s certainly a soundtrack. A lot of 50s soundtracks, black and white movies, most famously Now Voyager, draw heavily, or that one particularly, from Tchaikovsky. And I was thinking of Tchaikovsky with I think it's the rising thirds that I do on the guitar that sounds a little bit like harp, so that it's almost balletic, because you think I think of Tchaikovsky as defining ballet as we know it. It's every time you go off for Christmas and go and watch Nutcracker with your mother, your sister, your grandmother, whatever, that's it. So you're quite right, there is that link, that very romantic, very heart on sleeve. Is there such a word as winsome? I don't know, there's something about it, as if all the things that the heroine ever wanted, it's there, that.
But that is another aspect of the album I really like, because you start by listening to this sort of lovely, sort of harmonious stringed intro, and you think, oh, it's going to be one of those, and then all of a sudden there's this gut wrenching guitar solo it's got a little bit of Gary Moore in there. It's so much tone and feel in it.
It's interesting, isn't it? Funnily enough, I've inherited a couple of Gary Moore's guitars, because I shared the same guitar tech from time to time. I've worked with Graham Lilley, and I never actually met Gary Moore, I'm sorry to say, but perhaps there's a meeting in spirit where I have done something that I hope he would have liked. We'll never know. I thought that Gary Moore was terrific. One of the finest we've produced, and I can't say more than that, really.
So let's take a look at some of the other tracks. Under the Eye of the Sun. I mean, I have to mention that one, because there's this pervasive sense of Chris Squire in that song.
Absolutely.
It could be like a Squackett song.
Yes.
The collaboration he did with him.
Well, we did an album together. He asked me to join Yes at one point, and I was extremely flattered because I've admired all of the guitarists in Yes at different times. Some of whom, or actually most of whom, I've worked with, and even Trevor and I have actually talked about, maybe at some point we should do something. And guitarists are usually pretty loose and open about the idea of maybe doing something together. I think the thing about guitar, I was going to say guitar competitions. You see, I've gone into the main thing is that guitars work best when people are not trying to sound like each other. Don't turn it into sport, shaving off nanoseconds. I can play fast. Well, I can do this with tapping. Somewhere. And unfortunately, a lot of these guitar combinations do deteriorate into that. It's like everyone's determined to show their chops. And yes, it can become a big willy contest very quickly, and you've got to avoid that. So, but there you're talking about Yes, great band. Yes at its best, great band. And the sense of that, it's the kind of song that I would have taken to him. It's the kind of song that if I had joined Yes, I would have been coming up with something that I would think would be typically Yesy, and twists and turns and changes and fast and
it's got all that in it.
It's got all that, and it's got the harmonies and.
Is it Amanda that does the backing vocals on that?
Yeah, well, basically, it's neck and neck, 50-50. I've done the male stuff, she's done the girl stuff, and I think she sounds great on it, as she does on all the tracks that she sings on with this, and occasionally, her voice peeps through, and like on Hungry Years, where she gets a moment to sound a little bit like Clannad in a way, and I'm very, very proud of that. Very proud of the entire album. What a bore! He's so proud of his new.
Nothing wrong with that. I mean, part of this is just for the people that haven't heard the album yet, is to kind of pick some highlights. And for me, Under the Eye of the Sun is it's both you, but then it's got that wonderful influence of Chris. And is it Jonas Reingold that's playing the bass on that?
Yeah, Jonas Reingold, and his bass playing on it is just absolutely killer, isn't it? He's as much of a lead player as me on it, and it's great the way that he nails the right notes and then some. He is fantastic. All of us. It's interesting. Chris said to me he was a huge fan of John Entwistle. I think all the proggers think of Chris as being, Mr. Rickenbacker. He's the guy who defined that sound within that. So we know that he operated as a lead player. He never followed the changes. It was always there might be a nod to the changes, but he worked around them and used lots of space as well. I think Chris was a brilliant player. Sadly missed. Loved him to death. Loved working with him. And it was his sheer enthusiasm for music that made it so easy to work with him. Whenever I had a new idea, it was never, oh, your idea's crap, I've got a much better idea. It was always, yeah, we'll use that and we'll use this idea. So I understand how Yes songs work in terms of it incorporated everyone's idea. The songs just got longer and longer, and that was a great way to work. Everyone gets a chance to add their variation.
So here's the thing. Am I right? Is there didgeridoo on the track?
There is.
And what would Chris have said? He'd say, Chris, I've got this great idea. Didgeridoo.
Didgeridoo.
Would he say didgeridon't?
I don't know whether he would have liked he might have liked that. We have didge on it. We also have duduk, Armenian duduk. So we've got Australia, we've got Armenia. Rob's playing the duduk. There are a couple of duduks. So the one that's doing the drone stuff is being doubled by a duduk. So we've got, I think an unusual combination of didge and duduk, all the Ds.
And for people that have got a wide enough view of music, what I loved about tracks like Shadow and Flame, you've got like a tabla intro, and then you've got tar, sitar, and guitar.
Yeah.
The 3 different types of string instruments.
It's nuts, isn't it? Yeah, we've got. I've gone at these Indian influenced things before. I have to say, I think this is probably the best of all of them. Because we've got Shima, who is a real virtuoso. She is extraordinary, and she did her solo all in one go, no overdubs, boof, straight in there, mate. And she's wielding these cables. I don't know how she was able to do that. Extraordinary strength, probably. Break your arm if you shook your hand. Yeah, she's fabulous, just great, wonderful. Comes from a family of sitar players, all of whom were at least as respected as Ravi Shankar, if not more so. And she said, that her uncle was actually. She said her uncle, who taught her, was better than Ravi. It doesn't really matter, the fact is that I think the wonderful thing is that, in a way it's a bit of a love letter to all the people we've mentioned, and George Harrison, and I've gone at these things before, and there's just something that's happened here with this. You've got Dreamin' drums, you've got tabla, you've got a lot of things, and she wanted to hear it when it was all done, Shima. And I thought, well, I hope she likes it, because people who do this stuff authentically for a living, I imagine she was going to say, well, it would be better if you'd done so-and-so, so-and-so. And I thought, well, I might nod my head, but I like it like this. And luckily she said, actually, I really like it, and I really like the vocal melody at the beginning. And she said, you've actually followed raga form. And I thought, well, that if I did do that and observe the rules, then it was accidentally, but it's because I've felt it.
Yeah.
And I thought at the end, I just had half an hour at the end of a day's recording, and I thought I'll play several solos, and we played them back almost all at once. So you've got those perspectives, some of it fast, some absolutely, in frozen reverb at the back, just sort of overlooking the track. As she's still playing the rhythmic stuff, we've got this very kind of spooky kind of voice coming from the guitar. Something that I've been trying to do for years, and it finally all came off.
So you have the eerie sound of Shadow and Flame, and then that leads into Hungry Years, which for some people will be the most successful song, because it's got this of sunshine, West Coast harmonies, whether it's Mamas and Papas or the Searchers, the Seekers, that type of sound. All
that stuff, very early, almost early revival type singing, and I was thinking of Peter. It's funny. I was talking to a woman who was basically an opera singer, and I said, and she was an Afro-American singer, and I said, what do you like to listen to yourself? Because I heard some classical stuff that she'd done, sounded beautiful, some Lauridsen, and she said, Peter, Paul and Mary, knock me down with a feather, a black girl would say. Peter, Paul and Mary, quintessentially white, but powerful harmonies. And it got me thinking, and just recently, Joe and I were watching the Peter, Paul and Mary version of Dylan's ever popular Blowing in the Wind, and it's black and white TV, and it's all note perfect, impeccable harmonies, and the vocals are arranged in such a way that they're using dynamics. Sometimes they're singing very quietly, and then it's the impassioned lines really being sung out, and you get the impression of more than just 3 voices, a couple of acoustics, and a bass player who's off, noise is off, can't see him.
Yeah.
acoustic bass. And I was thinking both of that and also of the Birds with the jangly stuff. I didn't actually own my Rickenbacker at that point. I probably would have made it sound too much like the Birds if I'd had Rickenbacker all over it, but I had everything but. So we had Zamatis, we had a Godin, so one's an acoustic, one's an electric, both 12 strings, and then we added some keyboard, trying various things. In a way, it was a little bit of a leaf out of the Genesis songwriting book. In other words, what's guitar, what's keyboard, can't quite tell. Nice jangly sound anyway. That effect.
And then to wrap up the album, when I said to wrap up, there's a suite of 3 songs.
Yeah.
Which start with Descent, into Conflict, then finally Peace. It starts with a kind of a really ominous, almost a Holst, Mars, the God of War.
Yeah.
That sort of military drum beat, and then sort of it just evolves. What was the idea behind doing it like a song suite like that?
I think many of these things were conceived separately, first of all. This might be disappointing for people who imagine that all ideas come along chronologically and that you compose things. The first track was done first of all. It's not like that. It's like making a movie. You might start with the crowd scene, but at the end, for instance, start with the denouement. But for this, I was coming up with some bonus tracks, and I tend to work very quickly with bonus tracks. I found that the best ones usually just get done in a day. And we did this thing, and I thought, God, this sounds powerful. I had this idea on a back burner for a long time. Holst is in 5/4, this is in 4/4, but it was something that, funnily enough, Jo had done a film, my wife Jo had done a film called Descent years ago, and I was mooted to direct it. And that didn't work out, but we worked out as a couple. And then Ben said, quite by chance, because I had this descending sequence of tritones, and they're just going down, all these tritones are all going down in semitones for the theorists, okay? But it sounds spooky as hell, and he said, why don't you call it Descent? And indeed that was the name of one of the films that she'd done. And I thought, yep, that's it, it's Descent. And I believe she was the first person to say, why don't you do these 3 as, you've got the sort of build up to war, amassing forces, then you've got all out bun fight with guitar salvos meets drum salvos, percussion stuff, and it's all out stuff. Conflict was supposed to, the arrival. Here we are. This is it, and it worked conceptually with the album because there was so much political stuff being hinted at, if not addressed directly. And then the idea of a ballad that was both a sort of peace song and a love song and a spiritual thing. So I believe she was the person who said, why don't you join these all up? And I'm glad she did, because it works. And then Roger and I came up with a kind of join between the two. And so although it was written to order, Roger would be the first person he would never let me off the hook if he said, it sounds contrived. He didn't say that, luckily. It basically all worked and fell into place and sounds like it was written to go like that. But it was a very powerful idea. It's interesting you describe it as yes, 3 pieces of a suite, as it were. And that's exactly what it is, and it works very well, and I think it's quite exhausting.
It's a great way to finish the album. It really is.
Yeah, I love it. It's powerful, and I love what everyone brought to it. And my brother's doubling the orchestra with a flute or two. We do that to make the strings sound more real and richer, and so there are other instruments in there. It's not just strings, although often it might sound like that. Again, there's some Russian influence, there's some Holstein stuff, there's, my mother said, I played to, some Rawll in this too. Yes, absolutely, you got that. The big crescendoid things come from Rawll, isn't it? The most famous crescendo ever written is Bolero. So we got that tattoo going through it, and it's just everyone who did something on it just brought their own magic to it, and so many things just fell into place. You every time you make an album, you bring all these things to it. In a way, you're going to cook the same meal, but you never really, there's the carrots, the potatoes, the meat and veg, whatever it is, but you never really know how good that meal's going to turn out, and just something else happened. The master chef in the sky took over, and I'm very pleased that I think that the world of spirit kicked in and did something wonderful on this, because I can't tell you how to produce an album like this. It just happened.
Well, Master Chef Hackett, thank you.
Oh, thank you very much.
You've got a 20-date tour starting in November of this year. We can now say it's this year.
Yeah.
Starting in Aylesbury, going all the way through, I think, to Hammersmith at the end of the run.
Yeah.
And you're featuring some good tracks from the album, we're hoping.
Yes.
And you're doing all of Selling by the Pound.
Indeed, all of Selling England, yeah.
Which is great, because there's songs like Cinema Show we'd love to hear again, and a few of the other tracks which we haven't heard for a while.
Yes.
And then you're also doing a few selections to celebrate the 40th anniversary of Spectral Mornings as well.
Absolutely, yeah. I'll try and do as much of Spectral as is possible live. There's one track that I wrote with Peter Gabriel that was intended to go on Selling England. We'll probably do that as well. I know that Nad is dying to sing that, and I've got to have a word with Pete to find out what was the original key, and try and make that perhaps ever more authentic. But it had that weird sort of mixture of, is it blues, is it gospel, is it ballad, is it this, is it that? That weird kind of hybrid thing. But devil's in the detail. Got to find out the original key.
And in the meantime, because it's 10 months until the tour, people can go out and buy the album from the 25th of January.
Yeah, that's it. If the album takes off, like I think it might, then it's going to be very difficult, because then we have to do 3 hours. But we'll do, we'll do the new stuff as well as keep the museum doors open. That's it.
As always, it's an absolute pleasure. At the Edge of Light, 25th of January, out of InsideOut. It's great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Wonderful.